You are at war with yourself and likely don't realize it. Your thoughts, beliefs, habits, and actions often sabotage you. Are they helping you overcome adversity or setting you up for failure? To win this battle, you must connect with your inner warrior. We all have a warrior within us, one that strengthens our resolve and helps us to rise to meet life's challenges. If you're just surviving rather than thriving, then it's time to embrace the warrior archetype, live the warrior ethos, and ascend. If you are a veteran, first responder, or someone looking to take charge of your life, find your tribe, and then be the hero of your own story, this podcast is for you. Join Mike Kinney and Matt Hastings, two retired U.S. Army officers who served in U.S. Army Special Operations and Army Aviation units, as they share with you optimal performance practices they learned in their time with the Military and Warriors Ascent, a 501c3 nonprofit that helps veterans and warriors with PTS.
Well, all right. Welcome to the Warriors Ascent podcast with your hosts, Mike and Matt. Yeah, we've got a very special guest, Briana Goff. I won't steal too much of her thunder. I've known Briana for years. PhD, psychology.
Family therapy.
Mm-hmm. No, in her capacity out at K-State and Fort Riley. And I'll let her tell the rest of the story, but I've known her for quite some time. And we've worked with each other, I'll say on and off. She is the one that brought Matt into our orbit. Right. That's such a great story. When Matt came to our cohort, he introduced himself. Hey, CW4. I'm like, all right, cool, awesome. And Briana Goff told me to see you. And I was like, well, the circle is now complete. How awesome is that? And the rest is history. So we're so happy to have her. It's going to be a great discussion. We'll talk about, her background, how we all came to know one another. We'll talk about her book, Bulletproof Vows, which is another great topic of discussion. And, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Briana.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. And interrupt me with questions if there's something that comes up. Absolutely. Or I say something but I'll just give a little bit of background. I have been at Kansas State University as a professor. I'm finishing my 26th year, which is really hard to believe, but I've done a lot of different things. But 30 plus years ago, early 90s, I was a graduate student. I'm a fourth generation K-Stater. I like to throw that out every so often when I can. Fourth generation K-Stater, and did my undergrad in psychology and then my master's degree in marriage and family therapy at K-State. And during that time, I actually entered the graduate program planning to work with children. That was my plan. I was going to work with kids. And about 4 months into the program, got a placement at the Topeka VA. And I joke in my introduction in the book, I joke that I didn't even know how to spell PTSD back then. Right. I knew nothing about PTSD. But we were on the PTSD unit. I did that for about 2 years during my master's. And I loved it. I absolutely loved working with the veterans and their families. That was our whole purpose. We were family therapy interns, and they didn't have a staff person that did that. And so we did telehealth before there was telehealth. We were on the telephone with speaker phones. We did family days, but the veterans would come in, mostly World War II, Korean, and lots of Vietnam veterans coming in, finally having an answer for this thing they had been dealing with for decades, for many of them. They thought they were crazy, and they finally had answers. And they would come in, and it was just sort of, you could see the relief that I know what this is now. I know what I'm dealing with. I'm not crazy. But the thing that they would say, one after another, they would say, my wife has PTSD and my kids have PTSD.
Because of me.
Because of me. Yeah, because of living with me. What's out there for them? And it wasn't just one or two. It was one after another. So as a good graduate student, I was curious about what's this all about. So I started to research it, started to look at what was available in the literature, and ran across this term called secondary trauma. Mm-hmm. And so that was really anecdotal then. Dr. Charles Figley had coined it many years ago, but this whole idea of living with, someone with PTSD, you start to become infected with their symptoms. So you start to be jumpy because you know the cues as
You're
well.
walking on
You know the
eggshells.
triggers.
Yeah.
Yep. You get used to the withdrawal. You know the anniversary dates, right? And so that becomes a part of your life as well. And so that was, I got really interested in that. And so started to research and have done research and clinical work now for the last 30 plus years on PTSD and trauma in couples and families.
No, that's interesting. Because the saying goes, hurt people hurt people.
Right.
And you see that, and yeah, I mean, so we were just talking today, Christy, our ops director, about just the most recent, female class, and how a lot of the gals that came to us are the wives of the guys in, cohort 49, and how, I think I opined, I said, it's almost kind of like a family affair, that type of deal. But
It is.
Whether it's first responders tend to be with other first responders, because a lot of the husbands and wives are all first responders.
That was my question.
So that's the one thing. And then the other thing too is I have no doubt that, one maybe had some issues dealing, and then as a consequence, it's that walking on eggshells, like, oh my God, did he or she have a bad call today? And now are they going to come back and bring that home and all of that? So,
And part of the struggle is there's so much that you don't know about, and there's so much in these jobs, whether that's military, whether that's first responders, that you don't want to burden your family with it.
Right.
So there's so much that you don't ever talk about, but that doesn't matter because you still come back with it. It's still hanging. It's still there. It's still present. And so what I really encourage folks, even if it's been years later, even if it's the, war that happened 20 years ago or combat that happened 20 years ago, helping them understand how to communicate about it,
right,
and how it impacts it. They don't need the gory details.
That's right.
On both sides. Right. And so the reason that I was curious about, are they also first responders? One thing we know is that there does tend to be a connection with, oftentimes someone with trauma connects with someone else with trauma. They may not understand why, but oftentimes, and again, some of it is because of the same job. They meet at the jobs. We have military, dual military couples, veteran couples, that type. But the other piece is oftentimes for veterans, it wasn't just the veterans that had trauma. It was their spouses as well. Yeah. And so it's childhood abuse that they've had. Right. And even if they've never been in the military, that's been a significant part. And so helping people understand, again, your husband doesn't need to be burdened with, well, here's what my dad did. Just like the spouse doesn't need to be, I saw this kid blown up.
Concept I just got brought up was called generational trauma. In other words, this is, you raised me like this, parented me like this because of unfixed trauma from your parents. And it trickles down onto me, and none of us were in combat. None of us were first responders, but it comes from, World War II. And that person, passing these traits down through the family. And I thought, wow, that's just powerful.
Well, go ahead.
No, I was going to say what's interesting along those lines when you try to, all right, well, what is the linkage there, the root cause analysis and whatever. But yeah, there's a traumatic event, World War II, let's use an example. So then maybe some of those vets came back, and to Matt's point, it's the whole hurt people deal. And then that's a toxic environment for their children who then, are dealing with that then. And to your point previously, we hear resoundingly, I think there's a misconception, I don't know, maybe on the part of the audience, maybe not, where they think, veterans, it was one calamitous event, one shootout or firefight or artillery or explosion. And you had somebody that up until that point, they were super high functioning, no trauma, and one event precipitated, all that. What we've come to find in just hearing people's stories, that's seldom, if ever, the case. Right. 9 out of 10 times you hear, I had a terrible childhood. I was neglected. I was abused. I was told that I was unwanted, that I'm worth. And you're like, oh my God,
Yeah.
that's horrible. And then they go into the military, and you talked about kind of, well, hey, the kind of people that do that. Well, then what you get are people that have been either abused or neglected or feel vulnerable. And I think, again, just my opinion, but I think it's somewhat well-founded. People are like, well, I want to protect people from that. I don't want people to have to deal with that. And they feel this sense of, hey, I was vulnerable.
That hero.
Hero. I mean, and you talk to them, and most of those people will never say that they're heroes, but they're the protector. Exactly. The protector.
Yeah.
And
they do very well in the military.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's something to
Many
be
of them
said
do.
about that. But then what happens is all of that trauma, it's accumulated. You know, whether they call it, I think in one book, allostatic load. For kids, it's called ACEs, right? Et cetera, et cetera. But so much of that, like to Matt's point, to yours, it trickles down generation to generation.
Well, and I won't go into all the details of this because I don't know it, and this is way too academic, but it's both what they observe, but there's also research now that it's genetic, that trauma changes the genes.
Oh, wow.
And so what's actually coming down is a genetic predisposition and how it's expressed, which is really fascinating and way beyond what I know.
No, see, that's interesting because I could see the environmental, you know, whether getting into the cognitive behavioral, where they talk about distal and proximal antecedents that formulate your system of beliefs, you know, and that's really more, all right, hey, I was raised in this environment. Here's a belief system formulated around the way I was treated. And hence, now this is the way you know, it manifests itself in terms of symptoms or predisposition. But the genetic, that is interesting.
And then when you add the genetic
with the environmental.
The risk. You know, it's not automatically that, because I'm now, you know, we don't want to make that excuse of, it's genetic, so that's how I'm going to be.
Yeah.
But then when that's a risk and then you add the environmental to it, then that just doubles it. Just like we know with ACEs, like you talked about.
Right. And then again, you know, even away from trauma, when they talk about genetic expression, it's like, all right, hey, if you've got cancer or this or that in your genes, you're doomed. It's like, well, no, I mean, because there's, you know, environmental factors that either express those genes at times or not. And it's not necessarily a death sentence of, hey, my mom and dad died of this or whatever. It's like, but they were also chain smokers. And that may have had something to do with it. Now, if you start smoking, you're probably going to get emphysema. But if you don't, there's a high probability that those genes never express themselves or whatever.
Well, you know, if we go back to, all right, let's say I think I was raised pretty well, pretty lucky. And then I'm in the military and I come out and it's like, okay, doing some CBT or training or therapy. And they say to you, let's talk about, you know, your trauma. And it's like, well, I mean, again, which one do you want? You know, and it's like, no, it felt like I was in a box I had to pick. So I wasn't doing well. So I was upset about it, you know, and I would get mad at the therapist because you're just doing mumbo jumbo to me, you know. And then they one day brought out this crazy thing, that had lights, and I was to stare at it and let my eyes move.
You want me to do what?
Yeah, and so I'm getting out of these people are quacks. This is kind of my story how I met Dr. Briana, and you know, somebody said you got to go.
And these are all your bona fides, your certs,
and I
all
was
of
like,
that
okay,
stuff.
so what I'm looking for a big burly dude. It probably has a beard, big. And at the time I had a beard that was pretty big. And I said, you know, maybe some tattoos. And I want to be able to drop some F-bombs and say what I need to say. And this is who I got
That's who you got
introduced
stuck
to.
with.
And I was like, that is not a big burly dude. Or, you know, I do not feel like dropping a lot of F-bombs. And then
I think I probably dropped the F-bombs first.
yeah, maybe.
Keeping it real, baby. That's right.
And then here comes this darn EMDR contraption again.
Right.
And it's like, what is this? Please tell me, you know. So I don't know. I know I kind of wanted to tee that up and have a little bit of a discussion about what that is. Because I thought
EMDR.
you know, it was like this pure magic.
Oops.
Well, I call it magic.
Yeah.
I also call it voodoo.
Yeah, and voodoo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you've experienced that it works.
Yeah, and you've even had me sit on other sensors that vibrate and different things.
Yeah.
And so
Just trying different things. Yeah.
So EMDR, spell it out.
I will.
Yep.
So EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is why we use the term EMDR.
Yes.
I was anti-EMDR for years. I don't know if Mike knew that. I was anti-EMDR for years.
You're like, it's just
It's voodoo.
voodoo magic, and you're
that's
like,
what
come
I
on,
thought.
moving your eyes. You're like, come on, how can
flash in the pan? It
But
was
I've
the
heard-
fad.
I've heard a lot of great things.
It'd be gone. I have drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
So I got into my private practice about 6 years ago in 2018. I do that on the side a few hours a week, and was seeing several trauma survivors. That's what I've done. That's the population I work with. And that's the piece that you were talking about, veterans. And I want to just emphasize, I know that's most of our audience, but one of the things I want to emphasize is that trauma doesn't just happen to veterans.
Sure.
Trauma happens, or first responders. Trauma happens to everybody. One of the things we know is that 80 to 90% of the whole population is going to experience some kind of a trauma. Now, there's those that go on to have PTSD, and there's those that have the full ACEs. But part of why I didn't believe in EMDR, was very anti-EMDR, was I had a very well-known person years ago make the statement that if you're not using EMDR to treat trauma, you're being unethical. And I just thought that was a really strong. Now I know, I've read more of his stuff and I understand his personality. But I do have to say, I was very pessimistic, but I thought, after my first year in private practice, I thought, there's research now, it's still here. I had several students that had done it, and I had done the training, and I thought, I think I'll try the training. I'll check it out. I might use it once in a while, but I'll at least have that. Mm-hmm. And instantly, I was excited about taking it back after the first. It's a 2-part training, plus some facilitation. But they want you to start almost immediately after the first. You're not even fully trained yet. I was fully trained when I met with you. And just saw amazing things, absolutely amazing things. And so I've come full circle, and I just think it's the closest thing to a cure. I don't think anything is a cure for PTSD, sure. But EMDR is done right. There's a lot of people out there doing a lot of different stuff, but done right within the right therapeutic environment, it works miracles. And that's what I've seen. Since then, I'll just add one more piece, then you can come in. No. Since then, in the last year and a half, I've added neurofeedback to EMDR.
I know Jeff Miner speaks about that, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And that, yes. I would love to talk with him about that, because I'm finding professionals who do EMDR and neurofeedback. I'm doing it together. And I don't think we did that.
We started to.
We talked about it.
Yeah,
okay.
Right.
But I'm seeing really fast, and I do it as a supplement. So they do primary therapy with someone else, and then they come in and just target that trauma. And it's been amazing. And again, the more we can do for the brain and help the brain heal, the better outcomes, I think.
Yeah.
Is that like the breathing, deep breathing?
No, that's actual sensors on the brain, and they're giving the brain feedback and helping to retrain the brain.
So I had that.
Okay, we did that.
Yeah, we did that, and I sat on the mats.
Sorry, I don't remember. Yeah, that one was a fad.
I think you were hooking me up to some watches, and I was going to start recording some data, and I didn't go that far.
Oh, just your sleep cycle. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. I just think that's an important, for a lot of folks, just getting that, looking at how your sleep cycle and how much you're sleeping. Is it good or
I see.
Not?
Well, I think it was important to add to this anecdotally. It was like, because for me, it's like, okay, how does it not voodoo? Like, how does it help? What do I do?
Yeah.
What are the mechanics? I go in there, this happens to me, and all of a sudden I get the sensation that I'm in the thing again. I'm in this event, and I'm discussing it, and you lead me down some pretty deep questions and ask me some stuff about my feelings, what are my exact feelings and stuff going on right now. And at the end of the session, like, it's tough, but I go home that night, and I usually I've had a dream after this, and then I write about it, and like then it's over with. It feels like it's just disappeared for me.
Yeah.
And so that's been super effective on these little things that I didn't even know were a thing. Like I didn't know that I had this issue about this until it just surfaced one day. So I know that there's still more in there somewhere, and I just don't know, like, I think it's really nice to know that thing exists in case you run into some kind of a memory
something comes
that
up, yeah.
That keeps bothering you.
Well, and I think for a lot of folks, and I think we're going to talk about this a little more in the second, that stigma of going to therapy. It's hard.
Right.
So I don't want to get into that yet, but yeah, I wasn't what you expected, but you were referred directly to me, and I was told you need to work with this veteran. And of course, that's the population I mean, I love working with all trauma, but really love working with veterans in military. That's, and yeah, I mean, I try to get folks started immediately with the, I mean, we do some joining, but you're the one doing the work. And I think part of it is, again, we're such a population of, I want it fixed now.
Right.
And the good thing is this EMDR, and now with the neurofeedback, we can get it pretty quick, but man, it sucks. I mean, it really does suck when you're going through it. And because that's part of it is you have to get into it. You've done so much to avoid it for so many years and tuck it behind you,
Compartment.
tuck it together. But you have to figure out, and having someone who is walking with you is part of that. And again, knows the process. So it was getting into the memory and then, a little bit at a time, but being able to process through it. And that's the healing of the brain. And that's how it works. And how or why or what it does, we just don't fully know. But we know this seems to work and everybody should be doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I like to bring this kind of stuff up just because I was so against it and I was kind of vocal, and then...
Well, you'd done other therapy too, right?
Yeah.
That hadn't been real effective.
Right, because again, everything is what we'd say in the aviation world is garbage in, garbage out, So if you're not putting everything you got into it, you're not going to get this incredible result. It's not... Just like you said, it's not free. You have to work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it only works if you do, is the saying, right? And that's, I mean, for the entire program. But speak to everyone about what is the theory and, but behind EMDR, like how does it work? Because right now people are like, all right, eye movement, the linkage between the trauma and the emotion and all of that. So for those that are interested, like, all right, you've piqued my curiosity. Tell me more about what EMDR is about.
So the idea behind it is basically you're activating both sides of your brain so the idea is these trauma, it doesn't have to be a trauma. I've started referring to it as traumatic or adverse experiences, not just adverse childhood, but negative experiences that we've had. So it could be, a bad experience, a teacher yelling at you on the playground, and that gets stuck in your brain.
Right.
That gets... And what happens is everything that we've experienced is in our brain, but it gets stuck in our brain. And so when something triggers it again, so when our boss, when we're 30 years old, yells at us like the teacher did, all of a sudden it all comes flooding back. And so it's the image, it's the memories, it's the feelings, it's the physical sensations. And we talked about that. And it gets stuck, and you're right back there to that moment.
Right.
And so the idea is this process helps in real time, in the current time, helps you get back into that memory and allows the brain to process the memory that is stuck, gets it unstuck. And like you said, the memory's still there. We're not taking the memory out. We're not deleting it.
Sure.
The memory, everything's still there, but it doesn't have control. And that's what I like to tell people. It doesn't have control.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, because one of our, Dr. Leese, who's one of the architects of the program, he made that a point, even like what we do, Ceremony for the Dead, which I think you're somewhat familiar with, where, people will compose letters. He makes the point to say, it's not that you're forgetting any of these memories, because they're always a part of you. It's you're no longer giving them control or dominion over what it is. Like, all right, hey, I'm forever scarred by, you're like, yep, hey, this person did me wrong, or I was mistreated, or even I had to kill this person, I had to do my duty. But nothing's going to change that, but I'm no longer like letting that impact my life.
And I think the difference is a lot of times the advice people give trauma survivors is, well, just don't think about it. Well, you can't not think about it.
Right.
You can't just turn it off. It can sure turn on by itself, but you can't just turn it off. And that's where helping the brain do the healing that it needs to, and then in a good way, being able to go on. And again, everybody has other pieces. I think you guys carry a lot more in your duffel bags
Yeah,
than
and it's just weird
the
because,
average person. But
like you said, as you're navigating your career, it's like you're stuffing things in this backpack. I'll deal with that later. I know that's a bad one, but I got to deal with that one later. I don't have time
you
right
got to
now.
just keep going.
I got to keep going forward. And then one day, you lose the tribe, you lose the purpose, all this stuff, and it just starts flooding. It did for me.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting is in that article that we talk about in the Journal of Psychotherapy Integration, Dr. Leese, he tees up this notion that avoidance is the primary coping mechanism for veterans.
Oh,
So I'm going to avoid those emotions. I'm not going to deal with them. So to your point, it's like whether you're stuffing them down, compartmenting them,
Drinking,
using, avoiding. But then what happens is eventually you've got to contend with them. So I know for his part, he was like, we need to elicit that, but we also need to give you the tools with which to process them,
Yes.
which is key. So it's not a matter of avoiding because that's going to catch up to you. It's, processing it properly. To the point where, all right, I am, and I not to go on, but I think with a lot of veterans, they realize, and first responders, when you're in a situation and it's traumatic or whatever, you do at that instance often have to compartment so that you can do your job.
Yeah.
Right.
I think what people misconstrue is, all right, I compartment it in perpetuity, permanently. Yeah. It's like, no, you compartment it enough to do your job so you're not overwhelmed or overcome, so you can deal with the situation. And then, boom, once that's done, then you need to process it. And I think a lot of people
we're not trained how.
That's exactly
We're not trained how. We're trained how to do the first, but we're not trained
that is
how
exactly
do we deal with it now?
Or not, there's training or even being afforded the opportunity. Because it's like, stuff it, let's move on, next target, next case, next call. And you're like, whoa, that one was a rough one. And you're not even really afforded an opportunity.
That they're going to count on you.
Right.
We can count on you this time. It's like,
I've done that every time.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never
I got to just
break.
put it back there again.
So you do it again and again. And I always think about the first responders who their career just continues and continues, I did my 20 and but still 20 was a long time. But I mean, just doing it every day is all the time. It's a lot of work.
And that's why, not to bring up, but that's the burnout, that's the suicide, that's the violence, that's the substance use, again, in both populations. The other piece, though, is when you go in to do the treatment, that's kind of some of the voodoo, too, is that mindfulness and grounding, which I know the retreat does a lot of that. And those are those tools.
Right.
Because you've got to have the tools to, what happens when I'm overwhelmed with it? Because all I know is to put it in the backpack. I don't know what else to do with it. Now it's here because you haven't packed it with me, but you're not here and I got to figure it out on my own. Okay, here's where the tools, the breathing, the yoga, the mindfulness, the reaching out to a battle buddy, whatever that is. Those are the things you have to practice on a daily basis.
No, absolutely.
Let's go back
I'll say this in closing because we've only got a couple minutes. Here's what we'll do. We'll tee up for the next episode, if you're all cool with it. Let's go into more depth about bulletproof vows. We want to hear about that. Maybe a little bit more about EMDR, just in terms of where's the I stuff come in. And then the other big thing that you teed up was the stigma, right? Yeah. So where we kind of left it here is being afforded the opportunity or having the tools to process. But I think a lot of people, they don't even want to come up on the radar as having any issues to the point where, hey, I need some help, or I need some time to process, or the tools. They're like, nope, I'm good, because there's still, even with years and years down the road, there's still that stigma associated with, with trauma, post-traumatic stress, to the point where exactly what you said, Matt, which is, can I count on you? Right. And a lot of people think, well, if I'm telling him I'm hurting, then he's not going to count on me.
Right.
Exactly.
And for a lot of folks, and we will get into this, Matt's going to drop everything. We'll get into this more, but for a lot of folks, I don't want to tell anybody what I did or what I saw, because nobody should see that. And so, or they've tried to tell, I have adults who as children tried to tell someone what was happening to them and they weren't believed or they were blamed. Or again, you're the one we count on, and that becomes, you're the protector. Right. We know we can go to you, and now you can't. What's that going to mean? And so we don't tell anybody. We just keep it to ourselves, and then it just builds. And then when you do stop, it starts to take over.
All right, so hey, we'll end this episode here, but more to follow. So if you enjoyed this, we're going to go into even more detail next episode. And again, we'll talk about Briana's book. We'll talk about more of
Stigma.
the stigma.
Yeah.
Maybe some EMDR, a little bit more about that. And so join us next episode if you would. Appreciate you.
Hi, Matt Hastings here, sending a thank you for watching this episode of the Warriors Ascent podcast. You know, we strive to build a community of warriors made up of our nation's veterans and first responders. And to reach as many of those in need as possible, we need your help. Please just smash that like button and comment or share our content. Warriors Ascent is a Kansas City-based nonprofit that aids veterans and first responders with PTS. I went through this effective program and want those that are struggling to find what I found. Check us out on our website at warriorsascent.org.